Hello, my name is Russell Myers, independent for U.S. President for 2024. So, I have previously promised to present my proposal for a wealth tax. So, here it is. The idea of a wealth tax is not new. In fact, some countries already implement a wealth tax. Those countries tend to have a much higher general standard of living than the U.S. does. Yet here in the U.S., we have one of the highest levels of wealth disparity of modern industrialized countries. As a consequence, we have basically the lowest life satisfaction level of any industrialized nation, the lowest life expectancy, the highest addiction rate, the highest suicide rate, the highest violent crime rate, the lowest education ranking, etc. We rank dead last on democracy of first world nations, even behind many third world nations. None of this is a surprise. We also have the lowest trust in our media. That's no surprise either, since at least 95% of our media, national and local, are owned by 5 corporations. If we even attempt to have a discussion about a wealth tax, the corporate media, owned by those who would be subjected to that wealth tax, will absolutely never allow a fair debate or presentation of the subject for public consumption. The way the subject will be consistently presented will be in a way to convince people who would not be affected by a wealth tax that they should be fearful of it. Then again, we have seen proposed legislation which makes it so many more people would actually be affected. Such legislation is designed with the intent of failure. Past wealth tax proposals have also been criticized as being ineffective. This is true because these proposals have again been designed to be ineffective. Thus, there has been no real impetus behind enacting these proposals. My own wealth tax proposal goes hand in hand with my tax reform plan. Before I outline the wealth tax itself, let me explain a few things. If every one of my economic reforms prior to this were implemented as a block, we would definitely see economic stabilization and improvement. Those improvements would be extremely rapid compared to anything which has ever come before. However, the improvement would be slow relative to what is needed to recover our economy after decades of abuse, which has brought us to the edge of ruin. What is needed is truly radical change. Radical, according to those currently at the top of our economy have to say. Not radical in real terms. If the majority of the population saw positive benefit from these policies, which they most definitely would, then they would not view it as radical in the least. These policies are realistic, humanistic, and compassionate. So, to the policy itself. My proposal is to impose a wealth tax of 10% on all wealth holdings above $500 million. Now, as I have stated, if you do not have wealth holdings above $500 million, you would have no reason to be concerned with this tax. When I say wealth, this does include both liquid and non-liquid assets. It would include bank account holdings, stock valuations, real estate, anything which is currently used to evaluate a person's net worth. It would include both domestic and foreign holdings. This is not unreasonable. For example, if a person's assets are $500 million, or slightly above that, and they are taxed at 10%, That would mean they would still have $450 million in assets. I'm pretty sure they would not be suffering too much. If their assets equal $10 billion, they would still have $9 billion in assets. This tax would be repeated on a regular basis. I've not yet determined how frequently this would be repeated. Right now, I am suggesting every 2 years. Or it could be taxed at 5% annually. This departs from previous iterations of a wealth tax, which have primarily been suggested as a one-time tax, which is insufficient for the purpose. Something to understand about people with wealth at that level. Those assets are primarily held in investments. This means that even if their wealth is taxed at such a level, chances are highest their assets would recover very quickly, possibly within weeks. If it did happen that their assets fell below $500 million, they would still have $500 million, which is more than enough for any sane and ethical person to live on for multiple lifetimes. At that point, they would also no longer be subjected to the wealth tax. To enable the IRS to assess these assets, I would expand the number of tax auditors and investigators by 50 to 100%, possibly even further. In addition, if it is found that wealth is hidden in offshore accounts in an attempt to avoid taxation, any wealth which is hidden will be taxed at 100%, no exceptions. This will apply to any and all assets in any form which are not willingly disclosed. The goal of my tax and economic policies are not in any way intended to dismantle capitalism. In fact, my policies would stabilize and improve the economy in substantial ways. These policies would restore equality while still allowing more people in numbers to gain real wealth in real terms. These policies would allow this country to expand funding for programs such as an incremental basic income, Social Security, universal health care, universal adult education, universal child care, repair our infrastructure, etc. These policies would create and maintain living wage jobs, both federal and private. No economy functions on the wealth of the few. All economies are consumer economies. Let me say that again. All economies are consumer economies. To improve an economy as a whole, that absolutely mandates increasing the spending power of consumers. Right now, the wealth of our economy is intended to siphon off all wealth into the hands of an elite minority who then hoard that wealth. These elite few are the true drivers of inflation and poverty. They determine whether workers are paid a living wage or suffer. They determine whether you will be employed at all. They determine how much you pay for food, utilities, medicine, medical care, housing, education, and anything else. They determine whether you can afford these things at all. They do so with no care about the suffering that their greed causes, and many do so with the express intent of causing that suffering. I will again bring up Maslow's hierarchy of need, which can be applied to an entire populace. A populace in which the majority of citizens are constantly anxious and fearful for their survival and their futures are easily controlled and manipulated. If basic needs are met for that populace, that fear and anxiety dissipates. This allows people to focus on higher functions of reasoning. Anger diminishes, crime decreases, health improves, compassion becomes more evident as base values for that society. All of this must begin with the questioning and challenging of the status quo. Many people think that the status quo is static, that it never changes. It is not. The status quo is dynamic. Some people think that white-skinned people of any heritage have always held dominance in this country. One look at history and you realize that the Irish, Polish, Russians were considered lower classes not that long ago. The status quo is not a matter of skin color, which has definitely led to atrocities and oppression of those not in the dominant class. The dominant class can change from the current definition. The middle class is almost gone entirely, while the oppressed class is expanding at light speed. You can change the skin color or gender of those at the top and still have the same status quo with a privileged class and an oppressed class. Because that wealth and power imbalance is truly what defines the status quo. The entire intent of the status quo is the flow of wealth and power into the hands of the privileged few. Change who the privileged few are, but keep the same system, and you have not made any actual change at all. It has always been leading in this direction. So where we are today is not a change. It is a realization. It will continue in this manner until we, as a nation, exchange it for something better. Please share this article or video. Talk about these subjects widely. We have better options than what we are told are available to us. Make other people aware of this fact. Help this campaign any way you can. Just sharing knowledge of the campaign does help. Unfortunately, a political campaign under the current system does require funding. So if you can afford it, please donate whatever you can to help expand the campaign. All help in any way is appreciated. I will never spam you to ask for more. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.